My sermon this morning is titled, What's This? And the text is Joshua chapter 4, verses 19 through 24. Let us hear the word of the Lord together. I'll be reading from the New American Standard Bible, updated this morning. Now the people came up from the Jordan on the 10th of the first month and camped at Gilgal on the eastern edge of Jericho. Those 12 stones which they had taken from the Jordan, Joshua set up at Gilgal. He said to the sons of Israel, when your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, what are these stones? Then you shall inform your children, saying, Israel crossed this Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan before you until you had crossed, just as the Lord your God had done to the Red Sea, which he dried up before us until we had crossed, that all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, so that you may fear the Lord your God forever. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Well, I've been your pastor here for 3 years and 9 months. Does it seem that long? And in those 3 years and 9 months, we have had quite some journeys and some wonderful time together. But many things have been left unaccomplished. I have discovered one thing that is still unaccomplished this past week. We're still not unpacked. Yes, with all the extra time that the kids have on their hands being quarantined at home during this pandemic, they've been getting into things, and wanting to do things, and wanting to spend time with their daddy and their mommy. And so Grace began to look around, and she saw there by the front door an area that she wanted to use for her backpacks, because she doesn't have any place to put her backpack when she comes in from school. Not that they're going to be doing that anytime soon. She doesn't have any place to put her backpack, and I'm always telling her, pick your backpack up. Don't leave it on the floor. Don't leave it there. So she wants a place to put it. And she said, Dad, this would be a perfect place for the backpacks. I said, you're right. And she said, can I use it? And I was thinking, yes, although I knew that meant some work, because there in that little area, all those pictures that had yet to be unpacked, were stacked up and stored. And she said, well, when are we going to hang the pictures? And I said, well, I guess we're going to hang them right now, aren't we? So we went and began to hang the pictures, got the nails and got the other tools that needed, and began to size things up on the wall and figure out what to put the pictures. With the multitude of pictures that we have, Grace began to sort them and put them into categories that she could tell that some things went together, and being a very, very good sorter of things. And so as she began to do that, she began to see some pictures that she didn't remember. After all, when we moved here, she was only 7 years old. And over the course of these 3 years and 9 months, having seen some of these pictures in a long time, she didn't remember all of them. So she held one up and said, Dad, what's this? And it was a picture, a collage of pictures in a frame. I said, well, that's a collage that the youth group from Pensacola Ensley Church of the Nazarene gave me when I left the church after being the youth pastor for a year. I told her, we had some wonderful times while we were there, and I could tell you all kinds of stories about the various people in that picture. I said, two of those teenagers at that time are now married to each other. Indeed, that gentleman right there is now the youth pastor. He has followed in my steps, and he is now the youth pastor at that church. Shared some good stories about some of the others, and shared some tragic stories about one or two others in the picture. But through it all, I was able to tell her about being a youth pastor, some of the adventures that were engaged with that, and began to be able to tell her about some of the wonderful things that God had done during my year that I served there in Pensacola. Wonderful year indeed. As we went through some other pictures, she found another one and said, oh, I remember this one, but what is it? It's a picture of a church again. Yes. Seems to be a theme going on here because, yes, again, this is a picture that was given to me, but it was from my very first senior pastorate on the occasion of my departure. They didn't want for me to forget the 4 years that I spent with them, time in ministry shared with them, and what a wonderful time that it was, a time of growing and learning, and much that I learned during that time. It was a time during 9/11. I was at that church when the towers fell and the Pentagon was crashed into, and the plane crashed in Pennsylvania, and all that we went through during that time. So it was a time of growing and learning to respond to needs, and of God teaching me many things about what to do as a pastor and what not to do, and how God's grace is sufficient in times of trial and time of need. And so I was able to share with her memories due to that memorial that she held in her hand of pictures about what God had done in our lives. Nearly half of the pictures that we have to hang, and that are some are we did hang and some are waiting to be hung, are those that have a story that are attached to them. Not all of them, but many. Several of these pictures are mementos, memorials, memories of events that transpired in our own lives, of both good things and tragic things that have occurred. With some of them, the stories happened and are part of our past. With some of them, the story continues to go on and continues to develop with each passing year. Each picture that we have hanging is an invitation to tell a story. Some of the stories, as I said, are familiar to our children, and some of them they've never heard. But each story in some way involves the story of God, and these stories need to be told. When Israel crossed the Jordan River to enter into the Promised Land, God had instructed Joshua to have one man from each tribe to take a stone from near where the priest stood with the Ark of the Covenant, and to take it from there in the middle of the dry riverbed. And these 12 stones they were to take with them over into the Promised Land, where they were going to camp for the night. And Joshua there set up the 12 stones at the place called Gilgal as a memorial to the Lord. Now, as we know, memorials and mementos serve to evoke memories. They all come from that same basic word. They aren't there just for show. They serve as a means to an end. They invite curiosity. They invite the telling of a story. And as such, seeing stones set up in a pile where such stones do not belong would definitely raise some questions. What's this? Some might ask. How in the world did these stones get there? What are they there for? I'm sure if you were able to see the stones, which are slightly out of the picture frame here in front of the communion table, if we were here this morning in the sanctuary, you'd be saying, what in the world are those stones doing in front of the communion table? It provides an opportunity for me to share a story and to tell you what they're there for. And so it was with the stones that Joshua took from the middle of the Jordan, that he set up there in the place called Gilgal. And he even gave them instructions to the people that when your children ask their fathers in time to come, saying, what are these stones? Then you shall inform the children, saying, Israel crossed this Jordan on dry ground. Joshua goes on to remind the Israelites, for the Lord your God dried up the ground, dried up the waters of the Jordan before you until you had crossed, just as the Lord your God had done to the Red Sea, which he dried up before us until we had crossed. That all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, so that you may fear the Lord your God forever. For not only did Israel cross the Jordan on dry ground, but it was God who made it possible. See, without God, the crossing of the Jordan River would have been impossible during that time of flood stage. And that is something certainly worth remembering, that God stopped the waters and allowed the Israelites to cross on dry ground. The story of God needs to be remembered. The story of God needs to be retold again and again. And unless we constantly retell the stories, people will soon forget. They won't know what those rocks are there for. They will lose their meaning and just be a meaningless pile of rocks. See, unless we tell the stories again and again, people will forget that God called Abram from the land of the Chaldeans to give him a land of his own that he knew not of at that time, and would enter into covenant with God, and God would fulfill his promises to him. Unless we tell the stories and share them again and again, people will forget all about Abraham and Sarah having a child in their old age, well beyond the years when people normally have children. When Abraham was 100 and Sarah was 90. Unless we tell the stories again and again, we'll forget how Israel was delivered from slavery in Egypt, and God parted the Red Sea after he had sent 10 plagues so that they may find their freedom on the other side of the Red Sea. And God drowned their pursuers that they may be free. Unless we tell the stories again and again, we'll forget how God provided manna for the Israelites during their 40 years of desert wilderness because they refused to enter the promised land the first time when they were supposed to. So they spent 40 years wandering in the desert, yet in God's grace, during this time of cleansing for them, he provided them daily food, manna, that they would not starve and they would have food to eat. Unless we tell the stories again and again, people will forget how David slayed Goliath with a sling and a stone, something that was possible because of God's direct intervention. Unless we tell the stories again and again, we'll forget how God rescued Daniel from the mouths of hungry lions and how he was with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace and brought them out of that fire without even the smell of fire upon their bodies or their clothes. See, unless the stories are told again and again, they'll be forgotten. Having memorials, having mementos that invite people to ask questions is one of God's ways for helping the story to be told again and again to each successive generation. We must take advantage of memorials and mementos and keep the stories alive. So you might be asking yourself, what do I have that can share as a segue to sharing the gospel? What do I have that people may ask, what's this? That it would open the door for us to share with others what God has done. Particularly in this season of Easter, when we have such good news to share. Christ has died. Christ is risen. Christ will come again. The tomb is empty, and the promise of eternal life is available to all. For that we are thankful, and it's a story we need to share. When you ask what it is that I have that may serve as a memorial or a memento to open the gates of telling the story of God, it could be something as simple as wearing a cross around your neck, one that shows visibly. When others see it, they may have questions about your faith. If you are one who has house guests, I know we're not having a lot of those right now, but if you're one who has house guests, it may be an item such as a Bible that's left out on a coffee table in view that others may ask about the Bible. Particularly if it's an old Bible and has some life to it, some texture to it, invites the stories to be told about the history of that Bible, and invites the invitation to tell about the stories that are found within it, and the stories of faith that we have of our own. It could be a picture from a mission trip that you've been on and that you display in your workplace. People ask, well, who are those people in that picture, and what's that picture from? And you can begin to tell them about the trip that you went on and the amazing things that you saw God do during that time. And for some who are not averse to such practices, I've seen people go so far as to get tattoos on their arms and on their calf or shin, visible places of their body, which are often socially appropriate to share. And as they have those tattoos, they can be conversation starters as people look at them. And as you look at the tattoo, you begin to tell the story about the tattoo and its meaning for you and its significance, and how you could begin from that point to share the story of God. We have all kinds of avenues that are available to us. Don't be afraid to be creative. Pray and ask God and seek his direction about what memorials you can erect that give testimony to the great things that God has done, that when people see it, they'd say, what's this? 12 stones that Joshua piled up that day in Gilgal were not just a pile of stones. They were a testimony that speaks to the greatness of God. It serves as an invitation to tell the good news of God's grace over and over again. May God give each and every one of us wisdom and courage in erecting memorials to the great things that God has done for us. And may we ever be eager to tell the story of God to anyone who would ask of us, "What's this?" The Lord be with you. Amen.